All right, I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order on Wednesday, January 17th. Clerk Sandstead, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, I can. Member Gorham.
Present.
Member Kirby.
Here.
Member Lothar-Kemp.
Here.
Member Lofald.
Here.
Member Oswald.
Here.
I am present. Member Trinka.
Here.
Superintendent Gronseth.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Starzecki. Deputy Clerk Hassler.
Here.
And secretaries are excused and the student representatives as well.
Right here.
Oh, no, they are. Hi, guys. Welcome. All right. We have Ms. Carlos from Denfeld and Mr. White from East. Okay, great.
Welcome. So we have a quorum. Good. All right. This is a meeting of the whole to discuss the fiscal year 2019 budget review, and I will turn that over to Mr. Hassler.
What I'd like to begin with is a discussion that constitutes really a review of all of the sources of funding, all of the sources of funding that we have that support all of our budgets. In a lot of our discussions, and before we're done with this meeting, we'll be spending some time focusing on general fund. And that's our largest fund. It's an important fund, but we have other funds as well. And so you all have a handout that I've provided to you, which is titled Sources of Revenue by Fund for Fiscal Year 2017. That's going to really be the largest part of our discussion here today. Before we're done, we will take a look at some preliminary budget projections that I've developed for fiscal year 19, which is of obvious importance. But let's begin with the sources of revenue by fund. And before we start paging through this document, and I want to emphasize to you that it is not my intent to go through this document cell by cell and read it all to you. There's a lot of information packed into this, information that is probably going to take you more than today's meeting to fully absorb. And as I've gone through this project of completing this document for you, there's been different points in time where I've kind of said, I want to do more here, but we really didn't have time. So even in the coming weeks, I think that this is a document that can and should be updated that will hopefully be of even more value to you. For the continuing board members, I don't know that you've had anything like this in the past. For the new board members, I hope this gives you a good starting point to understanding what our various sources of revenue are. Again, to kind of frame the discussion of what we're going to be looking at here, some of the concepts I'd like to address to you right up front is that when you're talking about Minnesota school finance, timing is a very important consideration. And what I mean by that is two of the most important revenues that we receive are state aid from the state of Minnesota and local property tax levy paid by our local property owners. In both cases, there are some very large and complicated calculations that determine what funding amounts are going to come to the school district. In the case of state funding, there's a calculation which is called the General Education Aid Report. And actually, this is only 11 pages. The spacing on it is very narrow, so there's a lot of information packed into this. But that 11-page calculation determines over $64 million in state funding that the school district will receive in the current year and in future years, hopefully in future years, more than $64 million. That general education aid report also calculates approximately $8 million of the school district's property tax levy. In the case of our levy calculation, and the levy calculation is a process that starts with a calculation which is called the levy limitation and certification. We're going to be looking at information here for fiscal year 2017. And when you, to get back to my original concept here, which is timing, the initial levy amounts for all of our funds, but also for our general fund, were determined as part of a levy certification process which took place in the 2015 pay 2016 process. What that means, basically, is that in December of 2015, the school board was called upon to approve proposed levies. And those levies are then put in place for the next billing cycle, but that's not the end of the process. A lot of those calculations involve estimates, maybe estimates of student enrollments, they may be estimates of community population figures that factor into community service numbers. In a lot of cases, there's estimates there. And the good news and the bad news, I guess depending on your perspective, is the initial levy amounts are not done when the board acts on them in December of a given year. That sets in motion the process to bill property taxes. But in future years, future levy certifications will be done that include not only new levies for the future, but also adjustments for levies that have already been billed to taxpayers. And some of those adjustments are increased levy amounts, some of them are decreased levy amounts. It makes it very complicated, but my objective in preparing the document that is in front of you was to begin with fiscal year 2017 revenues. What did we receive? And that's most of what you have in front of you. But along the way, I want to emphasize to you that the state continually updates our state aid calculation, and they also update our levy certification. So what that will result in is fiscal year 2017 revenues, in some cases, are received in future years. I just want to make that point because in a lot of ways we have fixed dates where a lot of these activities start. And it's important that we start a process for state aid payments to come to the school district. But the interesting thing is that process doesn't end in a year. It goes on for a number of years. And that sometimes makes it difficult when we look at revenues that come into the school district. We've most recently completed an audit for fiscal year 2017, and that audit captured everything that was known as of that point in time. But even since that audit has been completed, we now know that there are changes, actually increases, that are helpful to us, that have increased our special education funding, increased our general education aid funding. And so when it comes to a summary document that's trying to report what is actual, it's sometimes difficult to capture actual when you just hold yourself to one 12-month period of time, which is generally what we do. Are there any questions about timing and the concepts that go along with the general education aid report and the levy limitation document? As we move through the presentation here, I have some pages, not very many, but I wanted to give you a flavor of what the general education aid calculation looks like and what the levy limitation that's going to come later in the discussion. General education aid is very important to us. Like I said, it totals over $64 million in state funding. We also get $30 million in in-school property tax funding as well. And in terms of all of our budgets combined, we're talking about $130 to $140 million. So out of those $130 to $140 million, we're up to $94 million with two funding sources, two pretty important funding sources for us. Let's move through the document, and again, I'll try to observe the clock and also avoid spending a whole lot of time on any one item here, but try to give emphasis to those things that are of importance. What you have in front of you is a document that on a fund-by-fund basis shows the revenues that come in to support the activities that are paid for through each given fund. The very first fund is our general fund. The general fund is our largest fund, and it's the fund out of which most of our staff are paid. It's the fund out of which most of our instructional programs and activities are paid for. The property tax levy is a significant component of the general fund. This document condenses for you the source of revenue. So you see in the far left column what is identified as the various revenues. You see an FY17 calculated amount for each of those figures. In the next column, I tried to give you a revenue determination, and what I mean by that is, how is this money determined? In some cases, there is a very discrete state aid calculation that may even be simple to describe. In a lot of cases, there are formulas out there that are not so simple to describe. So I kind of balance between giving you a sense of how the money is determined without overdoing it with a lot of detail. I wanted to give you a sense of which of our funds are restricted and which are unrestricted. And for some of you that might be new to this conversation, and for others that have had it for many years, a number of the revenues that we receive, whether they are state monies, whether they are federal monies, whether they are local property tax dollars, in some cases, not in all, in some cases there are strings attached. There are limitations on how that money can be used. And that's a discussion we've had as recently as last night when we were talking about compensatory education revenue. Compensatory education revenue is a form of restricted funding. The purposes for it are defined, and we have to kind of segregate those dollars within the confines of our budget. For those funds that do not have strings attached, for those dollars that don't have specific restrictions on them, they are unrestricted. And so it's not always possible to follow a dollar of unrestricted revenue on one end as it comes in and say how that money is expended on the way out. It is possible to do that as it relates to our restricted funds, but for our other funds, they are just all in a common pool of unrestricted dollars that support all of the costs that we have to make. The last column in the handout that I've given you is source. And in the sources, I tried to identify different categories of the source of the funding that we're receiving. What you will find is local sources, which are primarily local property taxes. There are other examples of that. As I'm going down the page here, after local, I happen to come upon a number that are other. Some of the others are kind of close to being something that may be considered a local revenue, but they're not as clear-cut. Though there are a number on that page, you will find that in total, other does not represent a significant portion of our overall revenue support. State source is a very important source of our funding. In general fund, and it's not restricted to general fund, we have general education aid being a significant source of revenue that supports not only the general fund but a number of our other funds as well. You will also see some federal funds. Most of those federal funds are grant funds. those grant funds will typically, I can't think of an example where they would not be having a restriction, and that may be Title I dollars, it may be Title II dollars. There's a number of federal grants there. As you look at general fund, your eyes might be drawn to the largest sources of revenue. You will see property tax levy as being a big contributor. You'll see general education aid as being significant, around $59 million. I'm going to have some detail on both property tax levy and general education aid that kind of breaks down, because in both of those cases there are many components that are calculated and flowing into the funding that we're receiving under general education aid, as well as under our local property tax levy. Another significant source of revenue for our general fund will be special education state aid. That is not part of general education aid. The general education aid calculation that I talked about earlier. Special education state aid has been something that has become increasingly challenging for us in terms of those monies covering our costs, and there have been recent changes made by the state of Minnesota in terms of how special ed dollars are calculated, and we are now in a place where the funding that we're getting is really tied to monies that we were receiving a few years ago with just minor adjustment on a year-to-year basis. It's really not keeping up with our program needs. Going beyond general fund, we have a fund that is separate for our school food and nutrition program. This program is supported in large part by federal funding. We get some amount of state funding there in terms of reimbursement from the state, but most of the funding in this fund is coming from federal sources. You can see those identified beginning towards the end of the first page for Fund 2. And as you go on to the second page, you will also see that we do get a significant amount of revenue from those students that don't qualify for free and reduced meals, and where their parents are paying for the meals that they do receive. When you go beyond the federal support and what parents are paying for students who are not eligible for free and reduced lunch, there's really very insignificant sources of revenue to support our school lunch fund. Our school food and nutrition fund needs to be self-supporting. It has been, needs to continue to do that. It does not receive any support from our general fund or any of our other funds.
Doug, while we're in general fund, could you, I know it's the federal piece, but could you point out which are the comp ed lines?
Comp ed is technically going to fall within, I believe, our general education aid calculated amount, and that appears on the first page. If you want to go back a few pages, and it's going to take us a moment to all get on the same page, I have a page that is titled FY 2017 General Education Aid. It's not at the very back, but it's after you've gone through each of the different funds. It will follow the page, which was our debt service. Everybody there yet? Once you get there, the question specifically was compensatory education. When you look through the general education aid document, this is identifying for you the various categories that flow into the total general education aid funding. Basic skills, which is about halfway down the page for this document, incorporates compensatory education revenue. It also includes a relatively small amount of funding for English learner students. And since we're on this page, this would probably be a good time, since general education aid is so important to us, to just kind of go category by category down that page and give some additional detail in terms of how those dollars are calculated. The largest piece of general education aid is basic. That's what the state calls it, basic, and that for us in fiscal year 2017 generated over $53.4 million for us. This is actually a relatively easy part of the calculation to understand. The state establishes on an annual basis a formula allowance. That formula allowance is how much money we will receive for each additional pupil unit. Now let me take a moment and talk about what's an additional pupil unit. An additional pupil unit begins with the enrollment of students in our school district. So on a grade-by-grade basis, we are reporting to the state of Minnesota on a regular basis what our enrollments are. And we report those enrollments all year long. I talked about timing. We report a number to the state actually in August of each year, before school starts. And that number in August is used by the state to begin this calculation. It's important that they begin it, because until they begin it, they can't start to issue payments to us. So we give them a number in August, which is our best guesstimate of what our total enrollment will be across all of our grades all year long. Not how many kids are going to enroll with us in early September, although that's something that's very important to us. But we know things change over the course of the school year. We do find some families move into the school district and enroll their students after the start of the year. We also find other families may move for various and sundry reasons. Students stop their enrollment with our school district. So that process starts out in August, and that enrollment, in most cases, of one student who is with us all year long, each day, every day, all year long, will count as one. That's pretty simple. That's true. Peggy can correct me if I misspeak here. That's true for kindergarten all the way up through grade 6.
Yes.
Get that? Good. After grade 6, with our grade 7 students through grade 12, those students count as 1.2. So I happen to have a 7th grader, and I happen to have a junior enrolled in our school district. I have a couple of elementary kids. They count as one. But my 7th grader and my high school junior enrolled for the full year will generate a count of 1.2. By all means.
Is the per pupil unit the same for a 7th grader at Lincoln as a 7th grader at Ordini's? Is that per pupil unit the same?
The pupil unit is the same, and when we're talking about the formula allowance in the basic part of the general education aid formula, every student across the district counts the same. The only exception there is our secondary students beginning in grade 7 who count as 1.2. But it doesn't matter what building they go to. They, in fiscal year 17, generated for a full year enrollment $6,067. The state has increased in last year's legislative process. The state increased those formula allowances by 2% for both fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19. So we know that those numbers are now $6,188 in the current year, and we know that the formula allowance next fiscal year will be $6,312.
I just wanted to throw in that that weighting system is the state's system, and it's the same for every district. Yep.
And does every pupil in the state get the same state aid? So a
Yes.
seventh grader at Ordine?
As far as that formula allowance goes, yes. Now, there's different components here that work differently for different schools, but at the basic level, that is kind of nice from a simplicity standpoint to be able to say that. And those dollars are unrestricted for basic. On a school-by-school basis, and we happen to fall into this category, at least for recent years, not in fiscal year 18, fortunately, but there's also a declining revenue component there. And you see represented that in fiscal year 17, that generated $138,000. I'm not going to go into the detail of that. It's there for you. That was detail I was able to get. We get a pension adjustment, gifted and talented funding. The state of Minnesota recognizes gifted and talented. That is, since it's so simple to describe, we get $13 for every adjusted pupil unit for the purposes of gifted and talented funding. And that funding is restricted for use only for identified gifted and talented purposes. Extended time, some of our students are enrolled for more than the regular school year. They may be enrolled in summer school. Are there other examples where students would factor into extended time?
If they're doing credit recovery?
Beyond the scope of their school day?
Right.
How about students that stay in our program, in our special education program that stay from 18 to 21? Those students?
I don't think that's,
It's not extended time, no.
no.
Basic skills, I touched upon that's where compensatory education falls. And within the confines of a very complicated calculation, we already have a leg up on basic skills, at least the compensatory education part. That is based on an account that occurs beginning in October and continuing through December of a given year. So let me attach some dates to that. So in October, just completed, of 2017, our October 1 enrollments were reported to the state, and between October 1st and December 15th, any of those students that were identified as free or reduced lunch eligible students factor into the calculation of compensatory education revenue. As most of the board is well aware, that is a calculation that happens building by building. It's a complicated calculation. We really don't have, I'm looking at the clock, got to move. So that calculation takes place, and it's subject to adjustment as everything else is, but we already have a pretty good idea of what our fiscal year 2019 compensatory education revenue is going to be, because the counts that go into that have been completed. Now, I'll say they've been completed, but again, they are subject to adjustment for various reasons. But that is the only thing really on this page that is something that we really have advanced insight into in future years. I'm going to skip over the others here pretty quickly. Transportation sparsity is a revenue we received. It really reflects the dispersion of students around a larger school district. Operating capital is something that is able to support technology needs. Referendum aid. We get state aid from the state as part of having a referendum. And I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it all today, but when a school district has a referendum, there is something called state equalization, which basically kind of puts school districts on an equal footing. That reflects that some school districts have a larger tax base per student than other school districts, and school districts that may be below average. Basically, the state aid kind of contributes towards our referendum authorization amount. The clock is moving, so I'll try to move forward as well. I believe we were in school food and nutrition. I'll move beyond that to school transportation. Fortunately, this is a very short page for you. General education aid does flow back to this fund, and we try to show there how that general education aid is calculated. It's basically a state allowance that allows us to allocate funds to support transportation based on general education dollars that are received. We also show some special education state aid, which is very similar. Special education dollars. Many of our special education students require specialized transportation services, and the costs for providing those services are captured and reported, and so we're able to allocate those funds to support our transportation program. I'm going to try to move quickly unless there's questions. Yes.
I don't want you to go down the valley here, but just briefly about the funds that the transportation costs for other schools that are non-public schools. Captured here in this?
These are revenues. Okay, these are revenues. These are not expenditures. I think where you're going is, as a school district, we are required to provide transportation services to students within our school district who attend a non-public school rather than our own school. Do you have anything to add to that, Peggy?
I just want to make sure that
It is listed here.
Yeah.
It's the 213,000
Oh.
reflected. That's the revenue we receive based on the number of students and the number of miles we report.
just so it's clear. Thank you.
Do we actually get reimbursed
Yeah.
for those?
Would we call that a full reimbursement? We get a lot of reimbursements that are not full reimbursements. I don't know how close this one comes.
That was pretty close.
Is it? Good. We need more of those.
Doug, can I ask just a quick clarifying question? The general education aid revenue that comes in, then that is a decision that the district has made to take general fund dollars to support transportation. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes, and
Because
at the
otherwise
risk
you'd
of
be
trying to be
$3
more
million
complete,
short.
the state looks at school district expenditures and revenues, and the state's definition of what general fund is incorporates what we call general fund, which is Fund 01. It incorporates school transportation, which is Fund 03, and it incorporates operating capital, which is Fund 5. So you asked, our decision as to how we allocate that money between general and transportation. And the way the state looks at our budgets, and when we report our expenditure data and our revenue to the state,
Doug, I think
they're not
something
looking
like-
at Fund 1 and 3 and 5.
I guess my question is really, was it restricted money or unrestricted money that, in the general fund, these monies, were they restricted or unrestricted?
I don't believe they're restricted, but
It's unrestricted.
General fund money that we spend on
Unrestricted general
transportation?
fund money, but we have to provide transportation
Yes.
costs out of that.
And
Yep.
it
Got
is
it.
a separate calculation based on the transportation we provide.
and when the state looks at our budget, they're not looking at our separate Fund 01, 03, and 05. They're combining them all. So that decision on what part we shift over to our Fund 3 or what we shift over to our Fund 5 really doesn't matter to the state because it's all one fund in their view, if that makes sense. Community service. Community service is a separate fund with significant property tax support. On this one, I wanted to provide some detail. I'm not going to read every box, but you can see there that there are different pieces of property tax levy dollars that community services receives and different calculations that kind of flow into how those dollar amounts are determined. We collect a fairly significant amount of money from families that have children participating in our Key Zone program, individuals that may sign up for and participate in a community education course. Many of the opportunities we provide, driver's education classes as well. We get some state funding support. There's Community Service Fund is the fund that ultimately ran to 3 pages. And state aids and grants on the second page is also a significant revenue source for this fund. Don't want to overlook that we do get federal support in this fund as well, and the most significant component of that would probably be on the very last line item that you see for community service. That's federal Head Start program. That happens within our community service fund. Operating capital is our next fund. Again, Fund 5, Fund 3, and Fund 1 fall into what the state considers general fund. We break them down. Operating capital, we would consider all the funds that are in operating capital will be restricted primarily to supporting designated operating capital priorities. But we're looking at revenues here. You'll see property tax revenue identified. You'll see general education aid identified, which is a similar concept to what we just discussed with some transportation, with our transportation fund getting some general education aid. You'll see on the operating capital a figure on the very last line there. For the continuing board members, you're probably familiar with this. We make a payment out of our operating capital fund to pay for part of our bond debt, which is not payable out of our debt service fund. And this revenue of $3.3 million really originates out of our Fund 01, our general fund. So one might question why it shows up here as a revenue, because it's money from another fund that is coming over to this. But within the scope of our budgets, it's reflected as a revenue to support a payment that comes out of our operating capital.
Doug, I'm wondering about the first line. Can you interpret aid funding based on APU ratio to ANC times 39% for me?
I'll let Peggy take a crack at it. ANTC is a reference to, is a property tax reference.
Adjusted net tax capacity is what ANTC is, and it comes from the levy document, and that's just how they calculate that funding.
And so this comes from the levy. Is it restricted to this operating capital fund? And what do we use it for?
We use it for, there are only certain items you can use it for. One of them is technology. We support our technology department with a lot of this. Not only staff, but purchases, replacement of equipment, that type of thing. Any capital items that need to be purchased or replaced, such as snow blowers or snow removal equipment, various things that facilities has.
Thank you.
Moving forward into our debt service fund, the revenues there are heavily weighted towards the local property tax levy. Over $18 million there is property tax support. We do get some state support that is identified there for you. We also, some of the bonds that were sold within the last 10 years were bonds that were qualified for the Build America bond program. I'm not prepared to go into a lot of detail about that here today, other than to say that that's a very good program because it provides funding support that allow us to reduce what we would otherwise have to include in our property tax levy. So there's $932,000 that, absent the Build America bond payment that we receive, would otherwise result in increasing our levy. Put a note at the bottom of the page there, and technically there are two other revenues that would otherwise show up on this page that I decided to pull off. And the reason I decided to pull them off was what I'm going to explain now. The school district has, from time to time taken advantage of opportunities to do what are called refundings. When you are a homeowner and you have a mortgage, you may have circumstances where you're able to pay off your mortgage early. Or you may have interest rates that are going down, and it's feasible for you to go through a process of taking on a new mortgage at a lower interest rate and paying off your prior mortgage. Refunding bonds are the same concept. When we issue bonds, they have designated interest rates that are attached to them, and those are fixed, and there they are. But there are circumstances that develop where interest rates in the bond market reach a point where sometimes they fall down to a point where it's advantageous to us to do a refunding bond issue where we sell bonds again at a lower rate of interest, and we take that money to pay off the bondholders that originally purchased our bonds. There is $94 million that would have been in on our books in fiscal year 2017 that related to bond proceeds for, I believe, 2 of the refundings that we did in recent years. And the reason why those monies were still on our books at that point in time was those were advance refundings. And by that I mean, while you and I can refinance our mortgage pretty much any time, when you sell bonds, there's a provision that's a call provision. And what that means is we, effectively by contract, are agreeing to the bondholder that we won't come back and refinance those bonds until a fixed period of time. So they have certainty that they're going to get interest payments from us for those period of years. With an advance refunding, interest rates have come down, and we want to jump, and the state has allowed us to do that, and there's a state provision on this that allows us to do a refunding before that call date has come around. And so then we hold those monies until that call date comes. And when that call date comes, bang, we repay the bondholder with the principal amount that is due to them, and they get no more interest payments from us. But until that happens, we hold those monies on our books. They're technically in escrow, which means we can't use them for any other purpose. And there was also a significant amount of interest income. When you have $94 million earning interest, even though interest rates aren't as high as we might like them to be, that generated over $567,000 for us in that year. But those monies are also in escrow. So I chose not to include them because they're not available to do the ordinary things that we do. They're there for a special reason of paying off bondholders with call dates that haven't come around yet. And we will be vigilant to do refundings in the future. But last thought here, you might have heard about tax reform that has occurred at the federal level. We're all going to be hearing more and more about that in terms of our withholdings that occur with income that we receive, wage income. One of the things that was part of federal tax reform is that they have eliminated the opportunity for advance refundings of municipal debt. So we won't be able to do advance our bonds are considered municipal debt. We're not a municipality, but in the federal definition, a public entity falls into the municipal debt category. So we won't be able to do any more advance refundings in the future. Doesn't mean we can't do refundings. It means that the refunding that you do has to occur within a fixed period of time. I think it's within like 90 days of when that call date is.
When is that call date?
That call date varies for each and every bond issue we have depending on when it was sold. I've got that information. I don't have it. That's something I can provide you. It's really interesting.
Okay.
We have call dates coming up, I believe, in 2019. We don't have any in 18. Okay. So we have some call dates in 19, and then there are a few others that stretch out for a number of years after that.
It seems like that would be helpful for long-term planning, so I think that would be great to see. A couple quick questions. Is that yes. $567,000
yep.
from the bond proceeds? That's separate from the $94 million, right? That's
That's separate.
It's not a part of that.
Those are actually two line items that Peggy and I
Okay.
were looking at, and I go, those are in escrow, let's pull those off.
Great. The sentence where you talk about the monies being available for the purpose of paying off is not complete, and if you could complete that, so I could do some research on that, I would appreciate it. Also, next time when we look at this, if we could see totals and have page numbers, that would be really helpful.
We can do this.
Thank you.
We can do this. Want to launch ahead here to, I gave some attention, so I won't give any more, to this page on fiscal year 2017 general education aid. I would go to the page right after it, and this happens to be page 11 of the general education aid calculation for fiscal year 2017. So on pages 1 through 10, you're cranking through calculations that result in these numbers, and this page is really just a summary page, so you see, A, B, C, D, going all the way down to ultimately W, which shows either aid or a levy calculation that that generates dollars for this school district. You will also see some things on this list that we don't have numbers by. So there's a small school funding amount that's not relevant to us. There's a sparsity factor that we don't qualify for. So that gives you a flavor of what the state aid summary page calculation looks like. And like I said, this interestingly enough, this was updated by the state in December. You can see at the very top left of the page, 12/15/2017. So after fiscal year 2017 was over, we received an adjustment that's reflected on this page. Seeing what the clock is communicating, there's some other pages here for general fund levies. I'm now not going to give any attention to this, but I'll just provide that to you as additional information. For a number of those levy amounts, there is a very discrete and easy to understand calculation that flows into the dollars that we get. I'm now going to go back a little bit and say I will give some attention to the first two lines. The first two lines there represent...
Before you do that,
yes.
Bigger picture, what's the source? Is this state money? Is this our local levy?
These are general fund levies. These are local property tax levies.
Local property
Now,
tax.
the state has a process that in most cases determines what those amounts are going to be, but they are our local property tax levy. The first two lines, one is identified as local optional allowance. The other one is identified as referendum. They are... in large part, referendum related, both of them.
Sorry.
The second line is referendum.
Okay, so this is both local property taxes and
Everything
local
on this,
referendum.
everything on the general fund levy page is local property tax levy.
The levy referendum, sorry, this is where the language gets
Okay.
challenging.
The first line is board authorized referendum.
Okay.
The second line is referendum that the voters decide on. The rest of those are levies that the board sets in December.
The board sets
Without-
consistent with state calculations that authorize those other levies.
But only the second line is the one related to what voters voted on
Right.
this page.
Now, this was a change. When the voters voted on the referendum, the first two lines were included. The state since made changes in legislation that allowed the board to authorize up to $424 per APU. And so that piece becomes board authorized, and the other piece is considered the voted referendum.
And another way of looking at that was the referendum that local voters voted on in November 2013 was for a total of $795.78, which when you add together the 424 in the revenue determination column for the local optional allowance in the 371.78, you get to that 795.78. But as Mr. Gronseth said, subsequent to us having that approved referendum, the state came in and introduced this board-authorized local optional allowance, which kind of separates it from the referendum, even though it was part of the referendum that was first approved. For the moment, with time being of essence, I'll not give any individual attention. Anything else on that page would certainly welcome any follow-up questions the board or others might have. The next few pages I wanted to give you, there's 3 pages that follow this, and these are pages out of the levy limitation and certification document. So I gave you the last page of the general education aid calculation. These are summary pages where the calculations have already been done. So this is a 37-page calculation. And for each of those pages, there's kind of summary information that break things down by fund and by purpose. On the second to last page, which at the very top would be identified as page 33 of 37, these all, I believe, happen to be general fund levies shown on this page, and you'll see what are identified as initial levies, beginning with operating capital, and it goes on from there. Safe Schools is on that list. Ice Arena is on that list. We don't happen to have an ice arena that falls within the confines of that. So when I talked about timing, what that means is levies are set initially, and then let's go to the next page. Here are levy adjustments for general fund. And so as part of the 2015 pay 2016 levy certification, we were making adjustments for various years. You see some 2014s, you see some 2015s. So adjustments are just part of the normal routine annual determination of what our upcoming levy is going to be. And that's what I was wanting to go over with you. I'll work to make some modifications to this to total up the pages, clean up some of the language, provide some additional. I'd like to give you some more detail on restrictions. For most of those restrictive funds, I've just told you it's restrictive. Where there's an easy way for me to communicate to you what some of those restricted purposes are, I will do that. Yes?
I just have a quick thought that I'll share. When we're talking about budgeting, from my perspective anyway, I'm not particularly interested in those things that we can't control as a board. So what we get from the state and what we have that's restricted, I don't really think we need to spend any time on that from my perspective. But the funds that we do have some control over, or that we can increase revenues one way, or that we can, that's what I'm interested in hearing about going forward in these, is focusing time on what we as a board have ability to impact.
I just want to say, though, I think it's hard for us to make decisions about unrestricted if we don't know what we're already covering. So I would like to see all of it, but and maybe not in total detail, but I think it's important that we understand what's covered under restricted funds so that we can decide where we can shift dollars around with unrestricted funds.
Okay. I have a budget projection that I'd now propose to share with you. I can get that going around both sides of the table, and be sure and take one. The very first thing I want to tell you is this is titled at the very top, preliminary. Now, for the continuing board members, you could probably go back to similar reports that you might have received last year as late as June, where I was still showing preliminary for our last budget process. let me go down through this section by section. What I'm showing here are changes in anticipated changes that we are anticipating for revenue, anticipating changes that we are predicting for our expenditure budget. And there's also a section of additional budgetary adjustments that need to be taken into account. So with the understanding that this is preliminary, on the revenue side, I did a couple of things on general education aid. And the first thing I did was, let's assume no change in our additional pupil units next year compared to what we think we're going to have for this year. So it's flat, anticipates no growth at all. With no growth at all in our enrollment, we would anticipate $1,120,000 of more revenue in fiscal year 19 as compared to what we will receive in fiscal year 18. For quite some period of time, this school district has experienced declining enrollment. That changed for our current year. We are showing greater enrollment this year than we had last year. And that's good. From the standpoint of projecting forward, our process in the past has relied very heavily on growth or decline rates based on a period of time of maybe like 3 years. So it's looking at recent history of what has happened in prior years. For this year's projection for student enrollment, I don't think it would be wise for us to anticipate that this growth that we have this year is going to continue. I truly hope it does, but it's so it's so inconsistent with our recent history, and there's not a lot we can point to really convince ourselves that this is going to be growth that we will sustain. I hope I'm wrong. So for the purpose of this calculation, what we've done is we've excluded this year of growth from our recent year history, and so we're taking that history that came up to this year, and we're looking at the enrollment we have this year and projecting a decline. Again, hope I'm wrong, and we did not anticipate the growth this year, so we were anticipating decline coming into this year.
Doug, can I just clarify?
Yes.
I thought you said you anticipated no change, but is that the second line, student enrollment change that you are?
The student enrollment
in?
change is
Okay.
reflecting what we anticipate
Thanks.
will be a declining enrollment. So I've kind of separated out what happens if nothing changes and then what happens if we decline. Now, if our profile were different and we had regular and anticipated growth one year after the other, I would probably still do it in two pieces to separate out what will just happen because the state formula allowance goes up 2%. And then I would show growth of funding because we were anticipating growth. We're not anticipating growth now. Again, that's something I hope we're wrong on. Another factor to take into account is what's happening with our general fund levy in fiscal year 19. And for this, we already know what our fiscal year 19 levy is because our board in the levy limitation process approved levies in December. And taking advantage of the full levy, the maximum levy that was allowable to us, we will see a decline in our general fund unrestricted levy. If you look at our total general fund levy, you'll see that our total levy does go up by $140,000, but that growth is coming from restricted parts of our general fund levy. So in terms of general fund levy dollars that will be available to address unrestricted needs throughout our budget, we'll have $500,000 less. And I'll emphasize to you that this wasn't for lack of asking. It's just the way the calculation works, and there might be some adjustments, some prior year adjustments that cause that number to decline. But using our maximum levy, we will see a decline in our general fund. levy for unrestricted purposes. Some good news on the revenue side for a expenditure source, for a revenue source that's not been real helpful to us in recent years. We are anticipating increase in our special education aid from the state to the tune of $630,000. I wasn't able to give attention to the detail of the special education funding calculation. It's highly complicated. It would be a good topic for future discussions with us. There are multiple paths that your funding can be calculated according to under that formula, and we happen to be on kind of a lower rung of the ladder in terms of the funding that we receive, but it is also a predictable source of revenue for us now. It was not in the last couple of years, but where we are now in that funding calculation, we have high level of confidence that that will be an increased revenue for us. So across all of our revenues in total, a little bit over $1 million of net revenue increase. Expenditure budget, these numbers are all for our general fund unrestricted budget, and that budget is heavily weighted towards salary, wage, and employee benefit costs for our employees. That's true for every school district that I know of. So what we know today is we know what salary increase to anticipate for FY19 because it's already been negotiated. Excuse me?
If I could, in interest
Yes.
of time, I'm guessing most of the things on this list, the board members probably can figure those out.
All right.
Can I ask a quick question, though?
Yeah.
Is the medical plan premium increase a prediction or a known at this point?
It's a prediction.
Thank you.
We don't have enough information yet to know that. It went up about 2.8% last year, and hopefully it will come in less than that. So in total there you see expenditure changes totaling nearly $2.8 million. It'd be nice if we could stop there, but there are some other things that need to be taken into account, and those include really coming out of discussion in yesterday's business committee meeting, that there is consideration to do a compensatory ed revenue adjustment that would impact our general fund as we currently understand that proposal, and certainly that proposal may change over time, but based on what we think we know at this point, we would need to address an additional cost impact to our general fund of about $920,000. And the last remaining item is relating to our current year deficit. As the board knows, as we were moving through the final months of the calendar year, we were identifying the need to make current year budget reductions. We are in the process of implementing a number of those. A good number of those that we are implementing are one-time savings. And it's important that we take advantage of one-time savings where we can, but what that means is that will not be savings that will necessarily continue each year, every year going forward. And so right now, I think we need to anticipate as part of our budget process that there's a gap of $1.3 million that needs to be addressed. And when you add up all those factors, revenue increasing a little bit over $1 million, $2.8 million of anticipated expenditure increase, another $2 million of budgetary adjustments, we are facing a deficit for fiscal year 19 approaching $4 million.
Just a quick question. Comparing, break the silence. The projected fiscal year 2018 deficit, how does this compare to prior years at this time?
I don't have a good reference for that. Do you, Peggy? If we did not identify the deficit that we were experiencing last year until very late in our process. So If I would have quoted for you a deficit for fiscal year, for our prior fiscal year a year ago, we probably would not have been providing you accurate information. We do have what we believe to be very accurate information as to our current fiscal year budget, as well as what we're looking forward to in future years. So don't really have a complete answer for you. It's a good question.
I'm just thinking as we're moving forward, I think it helps to look back at previous budget periods, obviously, as we're anticipating moving forward, so we can look at some different multipliers. So that would be helpful information, even maybe not if you don't trust its accuracy, but.
I guess I need further clarification why the fiscal year 2018 deficit is 1.3 million when we resolved to make budget cuts that left us with only 400,000. What's the difference there?
That figure started at around $2 million. And as we go down the list of each of the things that are on that list, like I said, a number of those are one-time adjustments. One of those adjustments was that subsequent to our audit process, we had a revised special education funding calculation that generated more dollars for us. So those are additional revenues that we will be able to include in terms of what happens in fiscal year 18, but it's not a continuing revenue going forward. It's a one-time adjustment. And it's multiple things. We have some positions that have not been filled at present, and we've made the decision that we're not going to fill those. Don't want to. One of them would be an electrician position, and so what we anticipate doing is after the end of this fiscal year, we think we need to have that position filled. So, in the meantime, that's a one-time savings. But we think that it's important that we will need to fill that position in the future, so that savings won't be there for us in the next fiscal year.
Okay, so maybe it's just a labeling thing for me then. It's
okay.
When I read it as a fiscal year 18 deficit, I expected to see 400,000 versus 1.3,
okay.
Whereas, if those would be fiscal year 19 expenses, not fiscal year 18 deficits, because we already resolved that.
Okay.
So just the way I think anyway, but that would make more sense to me.
Good point.
I agree with Member Oswald there, because if it's essentially a salary change because we're going to add a position back in, then that would be up in the expenditure for, renewing positions or reopening positions, something
okay.
like that. Right. I also am questioning the inclusion of the compensatory ed adjustment for $921,000, given that it's not like we're losing this money. It's just that we're spending it where we're supposed to be spending it instead of spending it however we wanted to in the past, which was inconsistent with statute. So is it because you're looking, this is titled as unrestricted general fund, and you're considering it restricted now, and you're considering it a loss then?
Everything on this page is focused on unrestricted general funds. So I guess, to be transparent with you, the assumption I make, and I may be wrong, the assumption I make is that if the adjustment that has been discussed is implemented, it will result in requiring an additional expenditure of general fund unrestricted revenues of up to $920,000, or an increase in class size around the district. So that's an either or. So
it's really a framing thing, though, because it's not lost money, it's not lost revenue. It's just that it's being put to the use that it's supposed to, rather than being used for general class size adjustment. So I object to the way it's included in here, the way it's framed. I think that is...
We may have to agree to disagree, and the board certainly will have continued discussions on what implementation you're going to go forward with on compensatory ed. But our compensatory ed has funded some staff around our school district relating to class sizes. And so if decisions are made to distribute that money in different ways, we will either see an impact on class size, or we will see the need for general fund unrestricted to pick up the slack for that money that has been shifted to another purpose.
Yesterday I brought up how there's a fluctuation in that one column that we talked about, column 7 or 6 or whatever on the one sheet. And so I do back up member Sandsted on this, being that this number isn't exactly what it could be. It probably is a max number, but there's varying degrees of how that can look. So I just want to make sure that's clear that even though in this document it's attributing it to a deficit, I can see our deficit being less depending on how we decide to spend that extra 20% of.
And here's my objective when I present this to you today for the first time. Understanding that there are other things that can happen, there are things that we don't know today. I think you kind of referenced that this could be the maximum impact. You're right. And I want you to see the maximum impact of that at the start of our process as we move forward, as decisions are made, as new information becomes available to us. It's a lot easier to take an ugly number and reduce it than it is to take a number that was represented early in our process and then have to increase it later. So I want you to see kind of the maximum potential impact that could be necessary for a general fund.
I am going to have to just object to the framing here, though, because this is the issue, is that it's the narrative that's being built, that this is an ugly figure, that this is a negative budgetary adjustment. Essentially, we're taking money out of our budget to spend it correctly on kids who are in need. And so the way that we choose to present this reflects our values and what we're talking about here. And so I would not recommend that we continue to include it like this. If you feel the need to include it in particular this document, then perhaps it is adjustment for class size. It's how we talk about it and how we decide we're going to place value on something instead of considering it ugly and negative and a deficit issue.
I see what Member Sandsted is saying, and I can agree with that in part. I think the issue is there are consequences to doing this, and how can those consequences better be placed on here so they're not yeah. I mean, I think we have to be aware of the consequences. There will be consequences, and those can be very significant for certain people, and that has to be made clear when the decision's made, at least taken into account. It can be not taken into account or taken into account. But I think that the consequences are so, I don't know how to resolve that, but.
Be happy to give that another name.
I think that's a bold and a courageous conversation we just had, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your wanting to share as accurate as we can as well. So let's not end this on, just this kind of, I think it's a great thing, and I know that you put this whole program together today earlier than we have because you are now with us. You've been with us now for, over a year, a little over a year?
Over a year. Yeah.
And so this is your opportunity too. Yeah, you want us to have all this great information. We've gone a little longer than we've wanted to, but I hope our audience and our next presenters don't begrudge us this time. We're a new board. This is great information. And I think we just need to celebrate and embrace the fact that we've got leadership and we've got information and we've got great feedback to us, and we're going to move forward. It's good stuff.
I have one other question, I guess. One of the assumptions you're making of all of these, one of the things we were presented with that we were not aware of was the cross-subsidy increase for special education. And I know that the budget had been based on what had been historically true and we had to pay in the past, and now all of a sudden we had a huge increase that we weren't aware of. Now, has that huge increase been carried forward, or how are we dealing with that in this budget?
If I could. The change in the legislature actually set a base and a consistent growth beyond that 0.46% increase based on that cap. And so we know what our revenues will be because it's been set. What we don't have an idea is that expenditure. And that's the piece that we've been talking with our legislators. You know, it's really a systems issue. It's how it goes through the system that is the issue. It's not, you know, I don't want to blame special education. I don't want to blame charter schools, but it's really a system that we're not able to track our expenditures like we should be able to.
Right, but we still have to put an item in the budget to account for that. So my question is, what number are we using now? How are we estimating that? Based on what's historically been true, based on the last one we got, or I don't know? Or do we know?
Our base has been set. It's been set.
But the expenditure.
The expenditure I'm talking about.
Is this not in the unrestricted? Is it somewhere else? The special education?
Right.
So it's not in here
But
on this page?
Right.
But the cross subsidy is coming out of this.
Okay, so it is.
Right.
Should be on here.
It's
It's in there.
restricted expense that's coming out of unrestricted funds.
Okay.
Right. So our assumption is that the same number is moving forward, or an average of our past expenses is moving forward. And so if there is another significant increase that we don't know about yet, that would not be.
Okay.
But this presumes the same as 18 for 19, because it's not.
So my assumption is, so the cross subsidy from resident students served elsewhere. So there's adjustments now in that statute that gives us some protection from that. So if there is greater increases, there's adjustments in the state formula to adjust for that. It's just that when they set the cap, it was set lower than we expected.
And as we move forward in time, we're going to benefit from some growth factors that will increase our revenue on a year-to-year basis. So the good news is, as we understand that formula now, it is highly predictable, at least for the near term. But there is a lingering issue, and that is that our base has been set that affects what our funding is this year, and that base was set going back a couple years to a lesser level of funding. If that base had been addressed in a different way, we would have a higher level of funding support coming in for a special ed program.
So when we were at the MSBA conference and we listened to Tom Melcher, one of the things that he talked about was with this new special education formula that has an adjustment for that tuition adjustment, that so if we were to have another significant increase, the state kind of covers that. One of the things that he said is, well, now the state is realizing a cross subsidy because the expense of that formula is greater than they expected it to, and so they may be making adjustments because they can't afford it. And everyone in the room kind of said, well, we can't afford it either. So that is an area that we will need to watch through this legislative session. I did want to just wrap up by saying this is the beginning of this process. We will have many, many more conversations, and I guarantee you that the numbers on these pages will continue to develop and shift and change and form, and we will have conversations with our staff and administration and the school board and community to have input onto how we move forward. And receiving feedback on that is how this will be done really well. So having all the people in the room and all the voices in this process is really important to us because we want to get it right. And we want to make decisions that everyone can stand behind and feel good about. So I think this has provided a solid base for us to move forward.
I want to also reiterate the thank you. This is a lot more than we got last year and years before that at this point, and I really appreciate that. And it was actually pretty readable and understandable for a bunch of numbers. So thank you for that.
Yep, and I just wanted to mention too, I appreciate all the time I know that was put into this from going through this now for 5 years. I also wanted to mention that I also agree with Sally that I hope you provide us with the most comprehensive picture, especially because we do have new board members as well. And I think it's just really important we're understanding every decision that we make, the impact that it has. And so appreciate it, you bringing that up, Sally. The last thing, I know you mentioned, Superintendent, that there's going to be a process and a lot of input, and I think it will be helpful for all of us, and particularly for our new board members to better understand what that timeline looks like, where we have many principals in the room right now, where the principals provide input to us, where the different input pieces happen in that timeline for that. Because as we're making decisions even next week, we need to be hearing from the principals and the schools on the impact of the decisions.
I have been in communication with principals today. I know there was a request last night for specific class size implications and what that could look like. I do have those numbers. They're a little raw right now, and I plan to get those out to you probably later this evening.
All right, I think that we can adjourn this. I will adjourn it without asking for a motion so we can get on with our next committee meeting. So this meeting is adjourned.
So let's begin our education committee and appreciate all. Do you want to take a break? Oh, I don't know. I don't. Oh, rearrange. Okay. You can. Are you coming here? Okay. So just for information too, we have 4 items on this agenda that are just informational. So we are going to be able to hear from presentations, and then there's 4 action items. So we're going.
Oh. That was my only question. We usually confer back and forth during things.
Okay.
Don't need to be.
I can move.
Okay, we can. It's not like you're not that
We
far.
can yell at each other across the table.
Yeah, we do it all the time anyway.
So welcome to our Education Committee. Are we all ready and refreshed and here? Okay. We're going to start off with our Assistant Superintendent Starsecki's report, and then she's probably going to carry us right through our presentations.
I can do that. Good evening. I will be brief in my report to the board. I always share for new board members, I always share the site visits that we take part in during the week. And so most recently we've been at Denfeld and Homecroft doing site visits, walking through classrooms. And on a side note, our Principal Maldonado at Myers-Wilkins recently had a baby. So I spent this week being principal at Myers-Wilkins with Joanna Walters. So it was very fun. So I'm still there. I'll be there again tomorrow, and met lots of staff and students in the last couple days. So that's been fun. The other agenda items on my report was an update on our full-service community schools. And so this is just a reminder that we do have a session, kind of a Q&A session at the end of the month on January 31st. It was originally, I think, the 30th, and we moved it to the 31st at 5 o'clock. We have a national speaker coming to share with you the model of the NEA model for full-service community schools. We had a team attend that training back in October in Milwaukee, and the training really resonated with us because of the structure that it provides for sustainability and scale-up. And as you know, we've got full-service community schools at Myers-Wilkins, Lincoln Park, and Denfeld. And so we're looking at how do we look at these 6 pillars, and how do we do a needs assessment around that work and provide some nice structure for sustainability and making sure we're implementing this work well. So you'll hear more about that on the 31st. He will also be here for 2 days meeting with staff, doing some sessions as well, more informational sessions, but also a smaller group will be doing some planning on scale up for our district. So it'll be a full 2 days while he is here. The last item on my report is just about our Staff Development Day coming up. It's on January 26th, next Friday. We have no school on this Friday, but this is for report cards and end of the semester type of work. Next Friday will be a all-district Staff Development Day. The high schools and the middle schools will have a presenter, a national speaker coming in for the full day. He is amazing. I've heard him before a couple times, and so I'm really excited. Dr. Anthony Mohammed will be joining us. And the elementaries are going to be working on the curriculum work that they've been doing with the new ELA reading curriculum in the afternoon, as well as doing some of the work on their school improvement plans in the morning. So they all have a busy day planned as well. Any questions about my report?
Where is the full service? It's right here.
Yep. Okay. Yep. All right. Next on the agenda.
Me.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
I apologize about me, but I had a question on when will we have a replacement interim principal hired for Myers-Wilkins?
Joanna Walters is officially the interim principal, and she will be back Elisa will be back mid-February. And in the meantime, we have other principals kind of coming in each week to fill in. This was my week to help support. We have some principals here in the room that are also helping fill in. Mrs. Shimon was there last week, and I believe Mrs. Larva's there next week. Mr. Golkley's helping out, Mrs. Lena. So we've got a different principals coming in.
I'm glad there's a team that's supporting them, because I know that's a challenging school to lose leadership like that, just even for a short amount of time. My other question is are we allowed to come hear the speaker speak on the Staff Development Day?
I think it'd be great. Yeah. Okay. I believe it starts at 8. Don't quote me on that.
Just send out that information.
Yeah, it's about school culture and climate. So.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right. Okay. Next, we have our monthly presentations from our schools to give an update on the work that they're doing around continuous improvement. We originally had Stowe and Ordine scheduled for tonight. Due to the meeting we had prior, it bumped the schedule, and so our Ordine staff are going to have to probably come next month and present. But I do have some staff here from Stowe that can come on up. And I believe you guys have the presentation on your Chromebook, so we'll just go with that if you're good with that. Okay.
So it must be like on page 6. Okay. Maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, turn your light on.
Welcome, new board members. We were just back there talking, and we said, you couldn't pay us enough money to do the jobs that you guys do. And I mean that. You know, there are so many things that people don't understand that happen behind the scenes. And I'm able to do my job because you're able to do yours. And having the tough conversations, and I appreciate your work each and every day. So thank you. I brought along my trusty compañero here, Lori Mitchell. And she is a first grade, second grade teacher split. So we'll kind of jump right in. Lori's going to talk a little bit about some of the celebrations that have been going on at Stowe, and so feel free.
So press the button. Good night. I'd also like to thank you all for taking the time to, your time and energy, blood, sweat, and tears for running for your positions, and congratulations to the new board members as well. It's very exciting. I also see familiar faces here, so that's awesome. You have access to a PowerPoint that has about almost 20 different items that Stowe feels are celebrations. And so I'm not going to really go over those step by step, but they are things, activities that have been going on for quite some time, some over 20 years, some forever, I've been told, such as the fruit, flower, and vegetable show. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, right.
1967, wasn't it?
And our environmental fair, which is held every April. I think this is the 24th anniversary of that awesome fair where we collaborate with other members. They come in, and the staff all brings food for them, and you know, we learn about all kinds of cool nature things. We go out to the nature trail, learn about worms, worm juice. Sorry if anyone is just taking a drink of water right now. But I also want to talk just very briefly about the celebrations that aren't on here, and that's, most of us probably know what FB stands for, Facebook. But out at Stowe, I think we're FP, which is we're a fiercely proud group. We're scrappy, and I think that if you've always thought of scrappy as not so positive, I give you permission to think of it as very positive. We're a scrappy group that we celebrate the minutia. We not only celebrate what you see here, but we celebrate the day-to-day minutia of things in our classroom that are not always easy. Not always easy. A little boy who just transferred about a month ago just lost his mom. I hope he'll be transferred back to my class. I don't know if he'll come back to the school or not, but we know that there's drug abuse. We know there's challenges, mental illness, and so the scrappiness in us keeps us going day to day, and those are part of our little celebrations that
you'll never see on here. But with the support of each other and the support of Nathan, it's a great place to be. Thank you.
All right. Well said.
Thank you. You get the numbers.
She is scrappy, let me tell you. We have a very unique staff. And when I mean unique, I mean it's unique. And the first day of meeting the staff, I'm like, wow, this is cool. If I can get in here, then I think we're going to be okay. And I just want to reiterate how true it is what Lori said about being proud and cohesive group. It's unique, and it's pretty cool. So we have a lot of different members that are kind of rotating on our continuous improvement team. And for those of you who have known me for a while, I built a house probably about 2011. And the house was a 1900 farmhouse. And I decided to buy it, got it for a dime and a song. And yep, I'm going to remodel this puppy. It's going to be great. And the more we got into it, the more I realized, holy cow, there's a lot here. And so when you live through a process like that, you learn a lot. What can you do? What can you not do? And, you know, having lived through kind of a restart and a rebuild of a home, it's pretty applicable to, you know, starting over at a school. There are some things that you need to do that are going to be successful if you just kind of follow the script. And working together as a team, building trust with people, high fives, you know, it's the one-on-one conversations about things that are near and dear to our heart. You know, those are tried and true practices that are going to work in any school that you're at. And I've had the pleasure of having a lot of those conversations. The comprehensive needs assessment, having come into it, much like a new house, you never know what you're going to get into. And so for Thursday and for Friday, we're going to be doing just some one-on-one interviews with staff to really get an idea of where everybody is at in regards to a balanced literacy framework. Okay? I don't know what I don't know, and so I'm going to be Sherlock Holmes and kind of figure out what are some of the needs of the building, and the best way to do that is just to have a one-on-one conversation. So from there, on the January 26th day, we're going to be sitting together as a group and talking about what are some ways that we want to learn from each other. And I found some of the best things that you can do is kind of stick your head out the hallway and look around and go, man, there's some really good things that are going on. How can I learn from this person? And so we're really trying to create some home brew and professional development. And don't copyright that, that's mine. How can we learn from each other? Because there's a lot of talented staff and some really good skill set that we want to push forward because it'll help with our students. So that's kind of our comprehensive needs assessment. It's kind of a, we're writing it as we go, and we'll follow the same process for math, enrollment, and a lot of different things. Now, if you kind of look at the data here, if you have your slide on paper there, enrollment is a concern. People have options. They can go to Raleigh Edison, they can go to Renshaw, they can go to Proctor, and every day I drive out on Commonwealth, I see these buses full of kids, and they're going in, you know, down by MacArthur, and I see 20 kids getting out of the bus, and I'm asking myself, well, what's going on? The only way to figure that out is to start talking to people. And last week sent out a survey about, you know, if you had the opportunity to recommend Stowe to your neighbor on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rank your experience? And what the research shows that if people are saying 1 to 6, those are your problems, and you need to address those right away, okay? When you have people who are answering that 7, 8, 9, and 10, those are your people that, yep, they have some really good things to say. So as we're getting 6s in, which have been very few, I might add, hey, how's it going? hey, I just got your survey and I just wanted to follow up. Because of that, we have a student who is going to enroll for second semester, okay? Someone who was completely just, I want to get out of here from Stowe, transferred over to a different school, and now was going to come back. And I found that if you validate people's concerns, say, yeah, we can address that. We're not perfect, but if you want to come in and talk about it, we can work through this, that people are really open to that. So there isn't going to be a quick fix here. You know, if you look back in 2013-14, we had 359 students. Right now, we're at 284, okay? And so this is kind of a systemic problem. And I'm going to kind of take this a step further. You're going to be making some really tough decisions, and I'd like for you to really kind of percolate on this concept and idea. Having been on the east side and on the west side, there are a lot of decisions that are real and need to be made, and there aren't any easy solutions to this. You know, when you look at the comp ed dollars and how they're spent. I've spoke to a lot of people, community members. We're knocking on doors, trying to get people's stories. And I think for many years, there are some forgotten schools, okay? Whether it is factual, whether it is perceived, that's what people are saying, okay? MacArthur, priority school, bottom 5% of all schools in the state, forgotten school. If you go 3 miles from Laura MacArthur, you have Bayview Elementary School. Does anybody know the zip code there, where that school resides? Duluth, okay? We paid $110 to take kids away from Duluth and gave Proctor money, okay? And that goes back almost 100 years, okay? And Stowe being geographically isolated, sometimes that's a perception, okay? And I don't have the solutions. I know that we need to talk about it, because if people are saying that, then we need to listen to them. So I'd want you to kind of think that through and let it percolate. I don't know what that's going to mean to you, but that's the messages that I'm hearing. That's not a victim message. It is perceived, and we have to address it. And we're doing that now by talking to people. That's the best way to do it. Academic data, kind of staying steadfast. And I want this to be put into perspective too. Last week, we were doing kindergarten assessments. Then there's more to the data than a right or a wrong answer, and here's proof. Kindergartner was with our title teacher. Word recognition, letter recognition. What's this letter? W. Nice. It was a W. What sound does a W make? Whoa, whoa. You're right. Nice job. Can you make a word with that? Waste. And the teacher kind of sat back like, that's strange. That's not what a kindergartner is going to say for W. So being the good teacher that this person is, can you put that into a sentence? The kid responds, and I kid you not, the waste car went willy fast. Okay? So, you can look at this data. There's a story behind the data. Okay? You know, the kid knew a lot of right answers, okay? But did he get it right on that test? He didn't, okay? And so I want that to also be considered when you look at data. If you're flatlining, there's a lot of really good things that are happening. And it's kind of looking through the noise of the data to kind of make sense and, you know, make the necessary adjustments rather than saying, hey, we need to change everything here. No, let's look at what we're doing really well. And if we need to tweak, then we will, okay? Poverty plays a role in a student's education. Not having a healthy environment at home is a challenge for kids. Teaching them the appropriate behaviors is priority number one for us. We want them to be able to adapt in school. And we're doing that. Moving forward, we have to build a team. And by having conversations one by one, we're going to start to build some consensus about what we need to do as a school and as a community to really have a high-flying elementary school in Duluth and make, our city proud. There's a lot of really cool things. The sky's the limit when you're looking at, creating a vision. Who are we at Stowe? We have to ask those questions. What do we want to do? Okay? And with the help and support of district administration and the school board being supportive, I think there is unlimited potential, to increase enrollment, increase student achievement, and make Stowe the place where people want to send their kids. So, thank you.
Can I just make a couple comments? I just wanted to make a few comments. I wrote some notes as you guys were talking. In the last 3 years or so, I've gotten to know the staff at Stowe pretty well, and I reiterate everything that you guys mentioned. It's an amazing staff, an amazing team, and there's a lot of pride in the staff at Stowe, and the culture you create there is obvious. So I just commend the staff for that. I really appreciate Nathan's approach to the balanced literacy framework that they're working through, and how you're getting to hear from each of your staff where they think that they are doing things well and where they think they could use some staff development, and doing the one-on-ones I think is a great way of collecting data. So I really appreciate that. And the focus that you've made on trying to increase enrollment, I know that was a charge given to you, and I know you've taken that on. So thank you.
Member Oswald.
As a former Stowe staff person from 2004 to 2005, I got to run the Reading Partners program there. So I understand the value and commitment that Stowe teachers have and the culture they have. It's long-standing, and they have to accept you. It's not that you asked to be accepted. And I'm very proud to have been there and made a difference there. My question, of course, is going to be revolving around the comp ed funds, and I'm not putting all the weight of the world on you, and I know you're doing a comprehensive needs assessment. Under the proposal that we were discussing yesterday, Stowe could potentially get up to $160,000 more. May not be that much, maybe half that, I don't know. But what does that mean to a principal, and how would you address needs with that kind of money?
Well, having won the educational lottery 6 years ago, receiving a grant, the most impactful thing that you can do is come up with a plan. And, summertime is a great time to get down when, you don't have to worry about, the assessments on Friday, where people can really focus and be themselves and create some internal capacity to move that rock forward. So hands down, the first thing on my priority list would be, well, let's bring people in and come up with a continuation of a school improvement plan. It's easy just to look at class size and say, well, we need to reduce class size. Anywhere you go in the nation, well, it's class size. There's things that you can do that not necessarily are the most expensive, but are very practical. Some principals got together last week, and we just started to brainstorm some ideas that are really practical. Myers-Wilkins, Laura MacArthur, we have a 2-mile radius of dropping kids off when it's cold. Attendance isn't very good on the really cold days. Well, on those cold days, what if you had busing for all those kids? And so there's things that we can do that, a teacher is going to cost you a lot of money to reduce class size, which is great, and we'll take it no matter what. But by having more conversations, I think the longer we think about what we can do, the more possibilities we're going to have as a school district to really be fiscally responsible in the money that is given to us.
Would you like that money? I mean,
I will not turn money away. I would not. And we'll be good stewards of it if it is given to us. But that's where we would start, is spending some time with everybody, from the people who are driving the buses to the cafeteria staff. It takes everybody.
Member Sandstead.
Thank you. In terms of, you talked about enrollment issues and also kids not being prepared. I'm wondering what your current pre-K offerings are on site and whether or not you have enough full-day spots, if you could use more, if you have more capacity, and if you have more space, if that was an option.
Yeah, looking into next year, we already have 61 students who are going to be enrolled in kindergarten at Stowe, and those numbers are going to go up. We have about 41, 42 kids right now in kindergarten, and so that enrollment, will, if we have them in kindergarten, they're going to stay, for the rest of the time. I haven't surveyed our families to know. And so that's, a part of getting out in the community and talking to people. Right now, we have sent it out on our Facebook page and into all of our Wednesday folders for Stowe. I figure we need to start there. Let's make sure that we're making everybody happy at Stowe, and then we'll expand that. And our vision will get wider the further on that we go this year.
And so for pre-K, do you have pre-K at Stowe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
School readiness and Head Start.
Yeah,
all that.
and it's
okay.
great. Yeah, we have 2 half-day and then 1 full-day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there more demand for full-day?
I don't know that.
Because that, I think, if you get kids in there, you definitely get them for kindergarten. And that all-day pre-K is an amazing thing from a parent perspective.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
I just want to follow up on the pre-K piece, and certainly we know research shows that if we get them in, they stay. If it's a good program, how are you working with, say, the staff of the pre-K program? So I love your one-on-ones, by the way, as a community organizer. Great. But just what are some of the ways you're doing now and that you envision doing more to help with that enrollment?
It's having one-on-one conversations. First week, they're planning on having 4-year-olds riding the bus. They were panicky. I said, Nathan, what are we going to do? Well, let's think this through. Don't panic. I wonder if we utilized our 5th graders. They could be bus buddies. There we go. And it came to talking to the bus driver that came up with that idea. And so, we still have bus buddies going on. So 5th grade walks over to pre-K and they walk them out. It's a great way for the kids to mentor. And, it's the sweetest thing to see this, tough 5th grader who just got into a fight on the playground holding hands with 2 pre-K students walking out. And then if they're on the bus, they're sitting with them, and it's been really positive. So that's it's not under my umbrella per se, but we have to be talking, and that's where it begins. And I know we're going to have a lot more conversations with the staggered start and pre-K, and we'll be a part of that next week, I believe. So great question.
You mentioned mental health and the home environment, and I've heard a lot of that as I've door knocked and been a part of different health focused groups. Just kind of curious if you have any thoughts about what supports or additional supports might be needed in a school setting for the board to think about.
Yeah. Being kind of long in the tooth in the district, you kind of figure out ways, how do you get kids what they need? And there really isn't a script of how to get kids' needs, but it's working with families. I'm working with families all the time, and sometimes, we see something that happens in kindergarten and it doesn't get addressed until 3rd or 4th grade. It's that trust. And so, It's working with Amberwing, it's working with Merritt Creek, it's working with Northwood. You have to get out and you have to be advocating for kids. Most importantly, you have to be building the trust with families and relationships. The last thing that I'd want to hear is somebody who I've never met or talked to say, yeah, I think your kid needs a mental health diagnostic assessment. They don't want to hear that. But by having real conversations about what's happening, I found you can build trust pretty quickly by, hey, what do you do when Johnny does this at home? Well, I don't know. I have no idea what to do. Well, do you want some resources? Absolutely. Okay? We have co-located services through the Human Development Center. She's booked right now. She comes out on Thursdays. And we would, welcome any and more support in that area. I have found that when classrooms can be mentally healthy, where teachers are talking through things as a group, morning meetings, all of those things help students feel safe at school. They know that they can turn that chip off in their head, and for 6 hours they don't have to think about what they have to go home to. And so we can control when they come to school. We love them, we care for them, we feed them, we do the best that we can, and a lot of times that's enough for them while they're at school. But for a lot of the students, they need additional support, and it's tough to get that support from families.
Member Lafleur-Kemp?
Yeah, I just had one last comment. I just wanted to also say I am excited about the potential of bringing Stowe back to some of the environmental programs that were started and have continued in different ways. And I was, through my past work, did some of the workshops back in the April days in the late 90s to age myself. But so I just want to say I'm excited about that. I know you're doing a lot of thinking around that. I know staff have hung on to a lot of great things already. And as a board member, I so much support any work you do to continue to implement some of the programs that have happened in the past, and thank you for that as well. So,
I guess I'll just chime in too with just the experience I had getting more involved in the Gary New Duluth community over the last year, and just it's such a great opportunity to have this groundswell of support and progress and intentional, because your community is also thriving with the new Gary New Duluth Rec Center and concerts in the summer, and just that opportunity for all of the community. So we're on this journey together. It'll be fun to help and support and encourage and move forward with the board where we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Keep up the good fight.
Next on the agenda, we have our monthly advisory committee update, and this month we have the Special Services Advisory Committee, and Jason Crane and his team will be coming up to share with you an update.
Members of the board, new school representatives, good to see everyone. Thanks for inviting us. I brought some friends along, and I thought we'd start with maybe an opportunity for them to introduce themselves and maybe tell a little bit about their PAXI story.
Sure. The microphone. I know. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Marshall. I'm the president. Ooh. Guess I'm really important. I am the principal over at Congdon Park. I've been at Congdon for 7 years. Prior to that, I was at Nettleton Magnet School for 19 years. So I've worked for our school district for a long time. I've been on the PAXI committee for a long time. I'm quite passionate about PAXI, probably because my oldest son, who will soon be turning 25, had a learning disability. Has a learning disability. And I learned a lot, and I wore a lot of hats as a mom and as an educator. And again, I'm quite passionate, and I really feel strongly about a lot of the great work that we do in the PAXI committee. So that's how I came to be. Plus, Jason calls me every year. No.
I'm Danny Dunphy. I'm the chair of the PAXI committee. I have been part of the committee for, I don't know, 8 years, 8, 9, I don't know, a long time. And I originally came to the PAXI committee when my son transferred from a private school to the public school, and I had a lot of concerns with the way he was treated within the school system, and especially within the special education system. So I speak out a lot, and luckily there was some people on the board that appreciated that. So,
my name is Loane Longin, and I have an 11-year-old who goes to Laura MacArthur. He has a lot of special needs. He's got a lot of medical needs. I've been kind of a squeaky wheel in the special ed department since he's been about 3 years old. Kind of a thorn in Jason's side since probably about kindergarten. I just started attending the PAXI meetings probably about 1.5 years ago when the issue of report cards came up, when the special ed students were handed the same report card as a normal education student. And obviously my little guy's got developmental delays on top of all his medical stuff, and he's never going to ever meet the same needs as his peers are. So complaining to the teacher, crying when I was handed this report card that says he doesn't meet the needs and doesn't meet the standards, started to think I can't be the only parent that has this issue. I can't be the only parent having these feelings. And she brought up the idea, well, why don't you look at PAXI? Instead of me calling up and screaming at poor Jason, join this other group where there's other parents, and we can start. I can not just be a squeaky wheel, but I can be a bigger voice and be part of a committee and hopefully, look at some change. So that is why I joined PAXI.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Hi, I'm Alana. I'm a member of the PAXI group. Not only because I was board assigned, but because of my children both needing some services, and this was a great place for me to start as one of my first board assignments. I had only attended once, I believe, before being assigned as a board member, despite my son having lifelong issues. So I find that it's useful to go and feel the camaraderie of other parents with the frustrations of how we do things sometimes. I think that's the best way to address barriers that come out of our system, the systemic issues that happen, and simple things like Luane's challenging report cards for kids that don't need to see that. And I totally hope that we still can change how that works and how that happens, because it's not necessarily fair. And so, the one thing that I'm really sad about is that more people don't utilize this committee, and I'm not sure exactly why or how, but I don't know why it hasn't taken off that this committee exists and that people aren't knocking down our doors. It should be. And so I would hope that when we're out in the community, we can tell people, especially when we get those concerns addressed to us, that we can say, hey, we have a PAXI committee, you should go there, not only, to find solutions, but for support too. It works.
So maybe to jump off some of the topics that you brought up, Alana, in December, I pushed out a letter to all of our special education families that attend school in Duluth Public Schools, inviting them to their families to attend PAXI meetings. And we had a large response already, so I envision our next PAXI meeting, which is at the bottom of the information that was handed out, will probably have a big group I'm hoping for. It is, as the literature that I handed out kind of highlights, that is an opportunity for our families to come together and collaborate with the district and bring your topics forward. We do have a lot of legal issues and programming questions that come before the PAXI organization. When requested, for example, I bring our teachers on special assignments to highlight some areas that they support for the district, and they will do presentations and respond to unique questions when asked to do so. PAXI has been a long-standing, over 20 years in organization, and before I should highlight this, that there are 3 other councils for special education. We have an ICOD, Interagency Council of Duluth. Danny, do you want to take over for a second? Because you've been the chair for that, or do you want me to continue?
Go ahead.
All right, so Interagency Council of Duluth works more with our secondary transition programs and works with our community partners, any agency that can link to our students, not only while their kids are in school, but what's going to happen for them next, is welcome to join those meetings and partner. And it meets just as often as the PAXI meetings, which is 4 times a year. And when needed, we meet more. We also have an early childhood council, and that's called the Interagency Early Intervention Council. And that meets with regional committee members to work on little kid topics and little kid programming issues and help me grow coordination issues, and mostly there'll be a billboard across the street probably within the next month, campaigns related to public awareness and information that can go out to the community of how you can support your family and who to connect with. So 3 different separate councils that work very strongly together on different goal projects. When probably 30 years ago, it was just the PAXI organization, but is divided into 3 unique organizations that support our families and children for Duluth Public Schools. I didn't plan on talking long, but more respond to questions if needed, and or allow any of our PAXI members to comment any further if they would like.
I just want to make a quick observation and thank our parents for being a part of the committee. And I would never be sorry or apologize for advocating for your kids, because that's your role. So I'm glad that you're a part of this committee. Thanks.
I'll just fill some air, I guess. I think the parents deserve a little more airtime here, being that you made the special trip to get here. I think that the topics and issues we cover aren't just about our own kids, but they affect so many kids that aren't present at the table. We are allowed to ask those tough questions of people in an environment, supportive environment, and we get honest answers. We create change. Both these parents here have changed the way the system works, and I applaud them both for being here and showing up all the time. When we've had these meetings in the past, it's literally pretty much just us. So I'm really hopeful to hear that there's more fresh faces out there that want to come. I was really glad to get that mailing in the mail, that I've never seen a mailing before, and my son's graduating this year. So that's, 18 years, or well, not 18 years, 13 years worth of years wasted. And so I'm really glad, for whatever reason, how you guys got connected here, that you continue and you persist. And we need to bring more people on board, because we need to stop the people from leaving us because of the challenges and rather addressing the challenges. Some change can be simple. We just have to know that they're going on and that it's a challenge. And so I'm thankful that you guys take the time to show up.
And can I just say that, and I heard some of that today, a little bit during some of the conversations that happened earlier. Parents are very intimidated to be even coming to a school district that's not welcoming to them. I've sat in IEP meetings where people have surrounded me and told me that my son's issues are because of a home environment, when the issues he was having at school had nothing to do with anything that was happening at home, because they didn't have those issues at home. And so just bringing that forward to people to say the issues that are happening in school are not necessarily issues that are home environment issues. There are things that happen in school with children that affect children in that setting. And so I think that I would like people to be very mindful of that, because all the issues that you're seeing with mental health and those kind of things are not necessarily a manifestation of a home environment issue. It could be a systemic issue happening in the school. Our children are being marginalized in the schools. They're not feeling accepted. They have teachers who don't understand what is going on with them, who are calling them out on the carpet for things they have no control over. And there's a lack of training when it comes to teachers in the school district and other professionals in the school district when it comes to children with mental health issues. Specifically, my son had Tourette's syndrome, and just some of the things that he was disciplined for that he had no control over whatsoever just led to him absolutely hating school. It was tough to get him to go to school because he was so marginalized when he got there. He didn't want any part of it because they didn't want a part of him. So I just really caution people when they keep talking about the home environment, the home environment, the home environment, because it's not necessarily always the home environment.
Member Trinka.
Yeah, I just have, obviously being a new school board member, what do you see as opportunities for us as school board members to advocate for our students within the district who have disabilities or special needs? And what would you point us towards in terms of resources, if aside from your group, if we're looking for additional information about ways to be supportive as leaders in the community?
So mostly just awareness of our current programming and our structure within the district. Every school district is different, and Duluth Public Schools, I think, is very proud of its specialized programs, and many of our surrounding school districts don't have specialized programs. We do. We have some unique licensure groups. We have more social workers than other people do, and it's the way we built our structure. So for school board members, just to be aware of the special education department and the resources that it has is probably first and foremost. Remind me of the second part of your question?
Other resources that we could look towards, aside from just your group and the other two groups.
Well, I just want to highlight that our special services long ago, about 5 years ago, we really tried to build our special education website to be really transparent and find information at your fingertips. So I was going to comment it, I forgot about it, but even our ICOD and our PAXI minutes and notes are all on our district website, and they're under the Special Services Department. So whether you're looking for due process support or information about who to contact with a unique licensure question, you can find that on our Special Services webpage.
My question is, since you only meet 4 times a year, let's say I get a call from a parent on February 9th, and they've got some concerns and they want to share. Should I say get in touch with Danny because you've given us your email right here? Or should I just direct them to the website? You know, how do I get them linked in if it's 3 months till the next meeting?
I had that. I'll wait for the light to turn on. I had that happen today. Oh, Danny, were you going to answer?
Oh, I could.
Okay.
I didn't put this on here, Jason did, just so you know. But I think it depends on the parent. If the parent is comfortable going directly to Jason and talking to him about it, he's generally pretty open with that. But if parents are not comfortable with that, if they want to call me, I will call Jason and address it. I am totally fine with being a go-between for any parent who doesn't feel comfortable bringing anything forward. We do have some people who work in the field, and I think it's ARC that started it. They have a parent mentoring program. So they could call them as well. They do have people who are specially trained in order to do that mentoring and to do some of those advocacy. There's several advocacy programs out there through ARC has a special ed advocate there as well as
PACER. I'm sorry.
Yep, PACER. So there's several different advocacy groups. It really depends on what they're comfortable with, I think. So I think giving them those avenues, because the more avenues they have, the more likely they are to come forward.
would offer that. Thank you. Nope, it's okay. I would offer that, first of all, it takes a lot of courage to make the call. We've worked really hard over the years to really, how are we going to disseminate information and invite people in? And so we've worked really hard to also push out to all of our special ed teachers within our buildings, and then we also have posters up, with postcards, because not all people want to be identified. Sometimes they just want to be anonymous. So we have to be really careful and make sure that we have a safe opportunity. It's important, I believe, to listen. Because they're calling for a reason. And oftentimes it's not that we can fix anything, because we can't. But we really need to be able to listen and then think about who might be a good contact. As a building principal, I certainly would want to hear if there's somebody that's out there that's a little, upset about something that happened within our building. But yeah, we've also, like I said, tried to provide not only Danny's email, but any of us. Sometimes we've talked about it's easier to talk to another parent than it is an administrator about concerns as well. So it doesn't matter who they call, but we're hoping that they would connect with somebody. We used to have an anonymous where they could email to. Do we still have that set up?
Mostly it comes into the superintendent email correspondence, and then they forward them messages my way. It's also came into the board chair at times too, and Mr. Kirby has been wonderful about forwarding those questions on.
Okay. And the other thing I just want to say is I would love people to come and visit the sites. Oftentimes, you have to really see things. And our special ed department looks a little different at Congdon. And, when you paint a picture and think, oh, what's it really look like? You may be surprised at what it looks like at Congdon, what it looks like at Stowe. So I would say, if you're able to just come anytime. Because there's just a lot of great things and a lot of great changes that we've made. But there's certainly areas that we need to work on. So please know that anybody, I would invite you to come anytime.
I know Dr. Carey had his mic on.
Thank you for recognizing that. The comment I wanted to make was I appreciate you sharing your concerns about the report card, right? Being in charge of curriculum and instruction, when we made those changes, the intent was to make sure that we were providing more accurate feedback to parents on the expectations for their child that year. And I could certainly see many situations where those expectations of what we really want a child to achieve in a year might look different for a student. And I think that could be a good conversation point about how and when is it appropriate to restructure what those expectations look like, because the true intent is really good feedback about what the learning expectations are. And I'm hearing that probably isn't aligning very well or very accurately for your child.
What's your name?
Mike Carey.
Because I did call somebody within the district once the teacher, after all the tears, who do I talk to about this? How could this go through without it, coming to a special ed person? And I think I called you, and you gave me a phone number, and I don't recall if it was you that I talked to. It was. And you didn't have any answers, so I ended up having to call. I think I called the state.
Okay.
And they were like, well, you shouldn't be given a report card that doesn't accurately express what your child is doing. And then I think the other answer I got was, well, you get, because he's on an IEP, you get the progress report. That should be good enough. So
well, let's have that conversation sometime. And I think Jason can probably help facilitate a sit-down time where we can talk through maybe what that looks like, or some ideas about what that could look like.
Thank you.
Member Oswald.
I was just going to ask if, Jason, if you could send the board a list of the parent advocate organizations so we all have that information to refer parents to that might come to us. But I also wanted to let the board know that contact any one of us. I mean, especially myself, if they're reaching out to you, they're comfortable reaching out to another board member too. And, I have vast knowledge, not anything more or less than anyone else here, but I can reiterate that sometimes people are just scared to do it alone and they need somebody to hold their hand. It's scary walking into a meeting with a principal or a meeting with an administrator, and you want somebody that you know is there and has your back. Even if it's a simple problem or a complex problem, it's always nerve-wracking to a parent walking into positions of power that are perceived. And when people walk in rooms, they see titles and not people. And we have to, sometimes hold their hand to make them realize that we're all people at the table and we're not just power and titles. And that, we're going to work on this together. So, and I hope that we're all open to that. I fully recognize that. And I believe there's people in every building that are open to that too. Sometimes you just need somebody to point you to the right people that will be supportive too.
And
so, one last, if I could, Jill.
Yes, and then I'll go to Loveland.
Oh, okay. In response to your request for an advocacy document, the ICOD a few years ago created a document that not only listed the advocacy groups, but listed our partners within the community, and it has expanded to include the Northern Lights District, and I can go grab those copies in my office and hand them out before the end of the board meeting. So it's a good resource.
And Member Lafleur-Kemp.
I just lastly, thank you all for advocating for your kids and all of our kids. That is our job. I just wanted to mention that if you have any legislative alerts or something, just as a group that you come in front of you that you want to make sure we're aware of, if you could get that to us. We do have some couple items on our proposed legislative agenda around special ed that we're going to be voting on next week, but just things that come in front of any of you that's really helpful that we can speak on and advocate on. Okay.
I was just going to say, too, I do have a governor's appointment, so I do sit on our state board, advisory board for special education as well. So if anybody wants me to bring something there, I would be more than happy to. I believe we're meeting tomorrow. I have to drive, Friday. I have to drive to the cities for that, so.
Thank you all very much. And one of my questions, and this is kind of courageous for me to ask this, but I just know that we are going to have conversation around special education funding and the formulas and how that has played a part of our budget needs. And I remember watching board meetings in the past, but I thought that there was some misperceptions shared vocally about when we talk about special ed funding as opposed to talking about our students that are being educated with our special education programming. And it seemed like there was people using words that were hurtful, I would think, to families in our community. And I just want to reach out to you and say that as we talk over the next weeks, I would really appreciate it if you ever thought that any of us said something that wasn't phrased in the most respectful way, that we could be courageous and come in and tell us about that. Or if there was any opportunity, I would come and meet with you one-on-one and say, here are some things we have often heard that are insulting to us. And so, Jill, I'm just going to give you a little tutorial before you go up with a microphone, because I would never want to be there. I would never want that to happen.
Sometimes it's hard. A lot of conversations don't happen about special ed children without money being attached. Anything that you see out in the media, any stories that they do, even I think they did a story about Laura MacArthur and their special ed kids, and they had my son in the paper, but it was still attached to money. Very rarely are there any stories out there about special ed kids in the district that isn't attached to money. I do appreciate that, and if I do hear something, for sure I would call somebody. But I do sometimes wish that we could have stories or conversations or talk that don't talk about our children and how expensive they are. Because I know that my child is a very expensive child. I know that he costs the budget a lot. He has an RN. He's probably one of the only students that has an RN para due to his medical needs. And I'm aware of that, and I'm conscious of that. So I think if we can just at some point have conversations where our kids aren't attached to money, I'd appreciate that.
And so there is where we are. This would be such an incredible panel. Along with, I would sit there too, because I think I have, some gifts that I'd love to share with the legislator. This should be the presentation that we are sitting in front of our senators and legislators. And I don't know how that happens, because I'm just new to this role, but I'll be there, and I know your connections with the state and sitting on the boards. They need to hear our stories of success and beauty and all of that, and not about budgets, but thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next one's mine.
Next one is Assistant Superintendent Starsecki doing our pre-K grade 3 leadership update.
If I could just...
Yes.
Thank you. There have been times during some of our conversations just over time that I've wanted to jump in and talk about the phrasing of how we talk about students. And this seems like a well-timed opportunity. So generally, we try to focus on the student first. So if we're talking about students who receive special education services, or students with a learning disability, students who receive free and reduced price lunch services, just always putting the student first rather than the program they participate in first. So just thought I'd throw that in.
I just have an additional comment that I don't think any parent that has been in an IEP meeting has ever not had to encounter listing your child's needs, and the person in the room says, but that's going to cost us something. And I think that's what Luanne may be referring to as part of that conversation, is that we rarely have a conversation on how to meet our kids' needs in special ed and with IEPs without having to, as parents, address the bottom line, which it's not our responsibility as parents to do. We're advocating for our kids and what is needed and negotiating how to meet those needs. But I don't think as parents we need to hear about that money because we have no control over that, and we're only asking for things that are required to be provided. So I think we can do a better job of working with IEP committees and people involved in IEPs about keeping those conversations separate. And even if you have to take a pause and reschedule another meeting and that kind of stuff to work figures in, I think that's what we need to do, because you don't like feeling that your child is a dollar symbol. And that's what many special ed parents feel.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next agenda item and recognize we've been here a long time, so I'm going to be kind of brief with mine, if that's okay, and if you have questions, I will answer them. I wanted to give you a quick update on the pre-K through grade 3 work that we have done over the last 3 years. For new board members, when I came on board, we recognized quickly that as part of the world's best workforce, one of the very first goal areas is that we improve our kindergarten readiness, and so we created a leadership team to really look at what is best practice according to research and the guidance we've got from MDE. And we've done a needs assessment with that and identified some action items that came out of some of that needs assessment early on. So over the last couple years, some of the things that we've done to improve our transitions and our pre-K programming, we have transitioned to the blended model, which you've heard us talk a lot about, and try not to isolate students based on the income level of their families, and that our classrooms, our pre-K classrooms feel just like our second grade classrooms or our fourth grade classrooms, where we've combined our school readiness, we've combined title dollars, Head Start dollars, and now we have VPK dollars that help support all of our early childhood programs. We've expanded offerings, so going back to Member Sandsted, what you asked about the full day option, I know Stowe in particular, when we initially were looking at full day options, that was one of the neighborhoods that asked for it, and so that was one of the first places we looked to expand having a full day option, and do have a full day option. So we offer both half day and full day options depending on funding. We have created a common application process, so we even now, I believe, have an online option for families that's going to be moved forward too, so that families can fill out the application online if they're interested in early childhood programming. And we worked really hard to make sure our ECSE programming is inclusive and that that's not a separate, isolated program either, and it's as least restrictive as possible for those students with disabilities. Most recently, we have made our pre-K through grade 3 team last year created a subcommittee to really look at how do we improve transitions to kindergarten, because that came out of our needs assessment. And there was 2 items that they took a look at. One was kindergarten roundup, and one was a potential staggered start. And so that team had dug into some research, literature, what does literature say is best practice, what districts have had success, what does that look like, and based on the research they put together some recommendations, and we shared those with principals last spring with the intention that those are implemented now this school year, because they needed some time to plan for those. So for example, kindergarten roundup, I'm just going to read what we identified as our purpose of Kindergarten Roundup is to create a successful transition to kindergarten by showcasing and promoting our schools through a safe and welcoming experience that builds a positive school climate and a greater sense of community. And so we don't want to be doing things like testing kids at Kindergarten Roundup and doing assessments and those kinds of things. We wanted it to be very much a welcoming experience and so parents really understand the community of that school. The second recommendation, and so that's going to be moving into effect this spring as part of kindergarten roundups, that those schools will be following those expectations. The second recommendation that came out of that group last spring was that we look at a staggered start for kindergarten. And the rationale for this was what our families are telling us is kindergarten is really intimidating. And they have lots and lots of questions. And they have lots of questions about routines and things that we might not think are questions that they might ask. What does lunch look like? How does my kid know how to get on the bus from at the end of the day? How do all of those things happen? And so we wanted to carve out some time where families can come in and meet with the teacher prior to school starting, where they get to talk about their child, what the child is good at, what the child might need, just anything that's going to help the learning of the child and build that relationship between the teacher and the student and the teacher and the families. And so it's not meant to be a time where we do testing. It's not really meant to be a traditional parent-teacher conference. It's really, we're almost modeling it after the home visit work that's been done at Lincoln Park, where it's truly a listening session and being able to hear from our families. And so in order to do that work and have it be cost neutral, the recommendation was that we take that Tuesday and Wednesday of that first workshop week, the Tuesday and Wednesday when schools typically start, and we do not have school for kindergartners on those days, and kindergartners would start on that Thursday. So what you see in your packet is the calendar that just articulates that for families. Page 37, because I've been working with Katie Kaufman to make sure we have a communication plan so families can plan accordingly and have enough time, knowing that kindergarten wouldn't start until that Thursday and that we'd be asking them to come in for those parent-teacher conferences. We would do a staggered option as well, so that there'd be some evening opportunities and it wouldn't be just from 8 to 3 that families would come in, and so there'd be some staggered in the days to make sure we have accommodations for all of our families. One other update I do want to share with you quick that I'm really excited about. One of the things that came out of our pre-K through grade 3 leadership team this fall was the need to improve our partnerships and transitions from our community daycares and preschool centers. We know that we are not going to have all 4-year-olds in our preschool programs at Duluth schools. So how do we reach out to those places where our 4-year-olds are and improve those transitions as they come into kindergarten? And so we reached out to the Northland Foundation, who works very closely with all of those partners, and we are going to be holding a joint event in February to just have a listening session. Again, listening, not talking, just trying to hear from those providers. How can we improve those transitions? How would they like to be a part of those transitions to improve those for kindergarten? So we're really excited about that, and we think it's the beginning of establishing a strong partnership. I said I was going to be short. Sorry, that was as short as I could be. Any questions? Okay.
So that looks like on our agenda now, we go to grant applications. Youth and Philanthropy grant application with Katie Oliver and Molly Fletcher. It's recommended that the Duluth board receive this item as informational. And then do we vote on this at our board meeting? Okay.
Sometimes you'll notice that the grant applications and the grant awards sometimes happen at the same time. It's just because there's a quick turnaround sometimes with those grants. But sometimes you'll see that.
When it says placeholder on our agenda, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's attachment?
That means we might have future grant applications that happen that.
Sometimes a grant application will come up between agenda setting and when you have your meeting, and so we have a placeholder there in case it's one of those quick turnaround grants that we really need to get it on the agenda, but we don't know it exists yet.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so our next, Dr. Carey.
He's up for the next one.
Oh, you're the next one. You're the regulations?
I was just being a little bit preemptive with my light.
That's good.
My
I
apologies.
like lights.
Item D, which is regulations, attached in your digital copy, if you take a click, you will see a copy of Regulation 6095R. Typically, regulations in terms of policy are attached clarifications or processes or procedures that outline how the district will implement a specific policy. We have no policy 6095. So we have a regulation for a policy that doesn't exist. And actually, when you take a look at the regulation, it's outdated information for students that would have first graduated 2 years ago. And also, the information is no longer accurate because it's changed over time. And we communicate that same or similar information out through multiple other ways, like our course guides and course catalogs. And it's posted on our website and places where people can find it. So to have that sitting there as a regulation didn't make a whole lot of sense, to have an outdated, unattached regulation. So we're just we're just letting you know, essentially, first that we're going to delete it, because we don't like taking things out of the policy section of the website without letting people know first. So really, since it's regulation, it doesn't require board action. We just wanted to let you know that we were doing it and why.
So we won't see this on the agenda on next week?
It'll still be on the agenda, it'll be in the record, but we'll have already talked about it. And so usually then what you would do in your role is just cover a summary of what I just shared, because I tend to be a little verbose, right? And so you could cut that down just a touch and off we go.
So now are we on page 41 of our?
So Dr. Carey just talked about the last informational item. The next item is 2A, which is an action item. So there's a deletion of a policy and an addition of a new policy. Do you want to talk about that?
Yep. So to give some preface, the state of Minnesota actually passed in statute recently that a district must, in policy, identify their practice in relation to weighted grades. As an organization, historically, we haven't and don't weight grades. That may come up as a future conversation of interest amongst our students, and I could see that happening. But for right now, what we need to do is just document in policy what our current practice is. And so policy 620, if I skip ahead, which is credit for learning, identifies a number of different situations in policy where we do and don't give credit and what the rules are around that. It pretty much follows the MSBA policy to the letter. And then you see the section where it says weighted grades, I believe. I'm going to scroll down to the section now. I think it's section 8, if I remember. There we go. So section 8, weighted grades. What we would put for now is the school district does not offer weighted grades. And if we would, in the future, choose to change that practice, we would change that policy to follow practice. So really the reason we're putting this forward is just to make sure we're in compliance with state law. So in that, if you go now to the previous agenda item, which was the deletion of credit for learning, the items that are listed, that short paragraph that we had under our previous policy 6098 is also covered fairly closely in language within policy 6020, so they're redundant. And so the intent then is to delete the redundant policy and just replace it with a new updated policy.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Any questions? Any lights?
This is just our first reading, so we'll have another opportunity, board members to talk about it. And then just with the weighted grades, I look forward to our student reps being actively engaged in that conversation with a few of your friends.
Will we bring up weighted grades as a policy clarification next week for potential conversation, or that not? We're just putting it in our policy.
Right now, this policy is stating that we do not weight grades. However, you could spark a conversation about whether that is something to talk about. And
just as background information, the previous district I was a part of, we actually had that conversation while I was there, and there's actually surprisingly a lot more things to consider than what might appear on the surface. It's not universally just a boon to all, right? There are pros and cons to that decision that really need to be discussed thoroughly before you make it. And so if that's something that as a district we want to engage in, it's probably a multi-month to year-long conversation to have that really well with all the people who could be impacted.
So I just want to add to that if you decide to do that, I would pass this so that we are compliant with what we need to do, and then charge us with developing a plan or a discussion about that.
So moving on to our agenda under, now are we at B? No, 2B, or not 2B, yeah.
So this is a resolution to accept some grant awards. So you'll notice that those are there. That's something you'll do at the board meeting next week. The next agenda item is a required item for extended field trips. You'll see that these will show up on almost every board, at almost every ed committee. And again, that's something you'll approve for next week. So this one's a Lakewood trip to Wolf Ridge. You'll see that is a very common extended field trip. And then lastly, we have diploma requests, which you'll see as well. You'll see for future items, we have a CTE update that we want to bring forward in in upcoming months. We've got a Key Zone and True North update that we'll be bringing to you next month. We'll be updating you on the secondary schedule task force, and then we have some additional policies we're currently working on we'll bring forward. So with that, that's the whole agenda.
So I move for adjournment.